World's wine professionals gather February 23rd through 26th for Wine Future 2021, the first fully virtual international wine business conference. Join over 50 speakers, including Francis Ford Coppola, UNESCO's Irina Bokova, and the OIV's Pau Roca, as they share solutions to the challenges of the pandemic, economic recession, climate crisis, and systemic inequities facing the world today. Register now at www.winefuture2021.com to be part of the future of wine, presented by Wines of Portugal.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen from Marbella in Spain. It's a great honor to be with you today and to welcome you to this series of webinars which are part of the Wine Future 2021 Summit. Wine Future was born as a result of the economical recession back in 2009, and we managed to gather in Rioja some of the most influential names of the wine industry. The topic of discussion in those days was the economy that was hitting every country around the world. In 2011, we conducted the second edition in Hong Kong because the market was taking us towards Asia. And things became a little bit more normal in future years, and we had to recover Wine Future because of the special circumstances that our society, our planet, and of course the wine industry are going through. A pandemic that has hit every single part of the planet, including the Antarctic, as I was told today, because of the change of the season. The new contingents of scientists that arrived in Antarctica have taken the virus all the way down to the South Pole. The economical recession that has resulted as the consequence of the pandemic, the social inequities, the climate crisis that we should never forget, the lack of leadership. All those are the topics that Wine Future 2021 will analyze from the 23rd to the 26th of February, of course, on a completely virtual format via Zoom. The Zoom and the virtual world has allowed us to reach many parts of the world and has also made the event more accessible, the democratization of the event management world, as they call it. People can log in from different parts of the world. And we are very honored to have more than 70 speakers from New Zealand to Chile, from China to the United States, which will be discussing the issues that I mentioned before. We have also 3 keynote speakers featuring Francis Ford Coppola, Irina Bokova, former Director General for UNESCO, and Pau Roca, OIV Director General. But today we're going to talk about a very important issue for the wine industry, which is wine tourism. And for that, I would like to welcome my partner, host and co-organizer of Wine Future, David Furin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pancho. Welcome everyone to our 4th in our series of webinars. The last time you may have seen me would have been on webinar 3 back in December the previous year, talking about digital marketing and social media. I encourage you to view it if you haven't already. It's on our website and can be viewed otherwise, along with webinars 1 and 2. They are free to all, as are all of these webinars, including the one we're here for today. As Pancho briefly mentioned, since we last gathered on webinars, we have added a 4th day to Wine Future 2021, Friday, February 26th. And in that, we've expanded a number of our sessions to go to 18. So more topics to be discussed, more wonderful speakers to be heard from, to learn about the challenges they've faced and the solutions they've applied to these wide-ranging and impactful issues that we are dealing with nationally and internationally in our business of wine. So today, as Pancho mentioned, we do have with us 3 very esteemed speakers who will be appearing again in a month's time at our conference to speak about the broad issues of wine tourism that are occurring in place in the production centers of wine, and more so also in the cities of wine. And today we have our moderator, a fantastic journalist and marketer, founder of Speed Tasting, Michel Shah, who's tuning in from Italy. We have with us Adrian Bridge, who you may all recall from our work with the Porto Protocol, which he's still very much involved in, and creating as well his work with the Fladgate Partnership. But today I think he'll be addressing his new project, World of Wine in Porto. The third in the triumvirate we have today is Sylvie Kaz, who as a travel expert is the go-to for Bordeaux in her Bordeaux Savour business, but you may also know her from her work looking after some very, very good Bordeaux wineries. So in this, I now pass the baton to Michel, and you're in her capable hands.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, David. And hello to everyone. And thank you for joining this wine tourism webinar. I think wine tourism is one of the fields that has been most hit by the pandemic. And therefore, I think we're going to have a lot to discuss today and in February. But anyway, it's a pleasure to have both Sylvie Kaz of Chateau Lynch-Bages in Bordeaux and Adrian Bridge, CEO of Fladgate Partnership, as my guests here today. Both Sylvie and Adrian, I would say, are very experienced promoters of urban/countryside wine tourism. Sylvie, as David said, in addition to having more than 20 years of experience in the world of top growths with Chateau Lynch-Bages in Bordeaux, some 15 years ago created her tourism agency and website, Bordeaux Savour, which caters for tailor-made tours for wine lovers in France and also around the world. I would say that her more urban tourism experience comes from her presidency of the Cité du Vin in Bordeaux, which is a unique urban museum designed to encourage wine lovers to take self-guided tours, punctuated by about 20 themes and spaces explaining the culture of wine in a totally immersive sensorial setting. Besides, it also has a very good restaurant, which offers more than 14,000 bottles from more than 80 wine-producing countries. So let's now go over to Adrian, who moved to Portugal in 1994 and took over the role of Managing Director of Taylor Fonseca Port Group, and further expanded the company with the purchase of Croft Port and Delafosse Port in 2001. Therefore, forming the Fladgate Partnership, which has actually maintained I'd say, a pioneering role in its field. And Adrian's more urban wine tourism experience comes from his launching of the Yeatman Hotel in Porto, which was in 2010, and is a luxury wine hotel, which took actually more than 5 years to complete, and which he was involved in every detail and concept of design and branding of the hotel. And the Yeatman also has a 2-star Michelin restaurant and the largest Portuguese wine list with over 1,400 references. And very recently, and similarly to Bordeaux's Cité du Vin, Adrian launched the World of Wine in July 2020, so in the midst of the pandemic, a major cultural center covering some 35,000 square meters of renovated port wine warehouse in Vila Nova de Gaia, which is, of course, is the historic heart of the port trade. And this too is a museum experience, which is dedicated to not just to wine, but to cork, to the port region, to chocolate, to drinking vessels from the last 9,000 years, and also to fashion and textile. And this is supplemented by shops, by 8 restaurants, a wine bar, wine school, spaces for temporary exhibitions and events. And as if all of this was not sufficient to continue Adrian's experience in wine tourism, he recently entered into a joint venture to create Explore Sideways Europe, which provides bespoke travel tours for guests to wine regions and wine countries. So both my speakers have really a lot of experience and knowledge in the field of urban/wine tourism. And I purposefully say urban/wine countryside wine tourism because that's what we're going to focus on today. As well as we're going to focus on aspects of wine, how they've changed since COVID-19, and how will wine tourism be different, and will it change in any significant way? Are different countries doing different things? And how can we use the current crisis to develop smart ideas, new projects, to implement into a new way of looking at and marketing wine tourism? And finally, we'll also talk a little bit about the economics, very important part, the politics and the sustainability issues of tourism. So whilst we go along, please feel free to ask any questions. I think the procedure, of course, is to put it on the chat, and we welcome as many questions as possible, which we'll address afterwards. So actually, I'd like to kick off with my first question to Adrian. So we're going to look at the future, but let's see where we are today with wine tourism, and what have we gained and lost in the past year, Adrian? You got to unmute yourself, Adrian. Thank you. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, so there we are. Thank you, Michelle. Yes, thank you very much indeed. And certainly it's been an extraordinary year. A lot of things have changed, but then I think an awful lot of things still remain fairly constant. It's kind of interesting when you look at what is happening around the wine world. A couple of points really with wine tourism. Firstly, that wine tourism means a lot of different things to different people. Some wineries talk about it in terms of accommodation, other in terms of visits, but over 50% of the wineries that are involved in wine tourism look at it in terms of cellar door sales. So the impact that we've seen from COVID-19 has probably perhaps more impacted accommodation, where international tourism has international travel has virtually disappeared. It's become more related to local visitors, many of whom don't need accommodation. And after all, I think one of the biggest confusions that we often find in the world is when people talk about tourism, they immediately think of accommodation and hotels. Whereas I would argue that when we talk about tourism, what we should immediately think about is content. What do people have to do to see, and how are you going to create the experiences? Because after all, that is the key motivation probably for people being wanting to visit many of the wineries, is to have an experience, have an engagement with the brand, understand what's behind the name, how do people behave, how do they act, how do they present themselves. And I think that's obviously a key point and a key takeaway for anybody who's in the wine tourism business, any winery, is to make sure that there is a totally consistent message, be it from how you present your wines, your winery, to your decoration, to your staff, and so on and so forth. So these are key issues that we've got to consider that probably become more important as we look to the future. I think that the other changes, obviously, if people are looking at wine tourism purely from the point of view of the importance of cellar door sales, clearly we've seen a huge shift to online and new channels of distribution. So in many ways, for many wineries, that cellar door sales now has shifted to online, and perhaps is not really for the scope of this conversation. I think what we want to do today is to talk about more the physical assets, the interaction that one's going to have with the clients and customers. So I think the key points that we would look at is firstly that everyone has had to deal with a local market when probably they set their businesses up perhaps for international tourists. So there's a key shift there in terms of what people are looking for from their experience. And that shift has been more profound in certain areas than others. So if you look at what's happening in Australia, over 20% of wineries in Australia will report that they've had an increase in business because of local tourists. If you can't go, you can't get off the land mass and continent of Australia, you tend to focus on what you can do locally. However, if you are someone like Spain, Spain is only 1% of Spanish wineries report an increase that they've had in terms of wine tourism, simply because they were more reliant on inbound tourists to their market. Portugal has had an experience somewhere in between the experience of Spain and indeed Australia, where, you know, for most of wineries here in Portugal, we've probably seen a fairly substantial drop. Probably 90% of people are experiencing lower sales than they had, and they've had to rely more on the domestic market. I think as we look to lessons that come from that, obviously that is an adjustment of our product base. But I'm also very encouraged that a survey, for example, that was done by winetourism.com, which came out in November of last year, what they were able to report was over 80% of wineries that they surveyed, and they surveyed about 1,000 wineries from 30 odd countries around the world. What over 80% of those wineries reported is that they were positive about the future of wine tourism. So I think although we've had the coronavirus experience, we've had this experience of closing down, we've had to adapt our business models, most people are very positive that the basic arguments of why one's in the wine tourism business are still valid and are still likely to continue to fuel future growth. I know that Wines of Portugal are a sponsor of this particular session, and it's very interesting to see that that the tourism boards of Portugal have aligned with the wine producing side, other entities, you know, Wines of Portugal, along with Portugal Tourism, to understand that wine tourism can become a tremendous vehicle for discovery of the various regions. So in order to develop a more sustainable and longer term growth in tourism and stimulate perhaps tourist activity in interior parts of the country, wine offers a tremendous vehicle. So I think it's extremely positive that most people are viewing the opportunity for growth into the future. The only thing I would probably say, and if I can just in closing would say that the one issue that we're probably looking at is that when this returns, and there's clearly debates as to whether it'll be Easter of 2021 or whether it'll be into 2022, we don't particularly know. But the point is it will return. And so 2 points we're looking at. One is that this is the moment to get investments done to make sure that you're ready to receive customers when they come back. And the second is additional training of our staff, because everyone all over the world would have had an extremely different experience. And if we go into the interaction with customers in the future on the basis that they've had the same coronavirus experiences we've had in our own local country, then I think we're probably making assumptions too far. So I think there's going to have to be much greater sensitivity on how we communicate with our visitors once they return.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, in fact, that is a question I'd like to address. I'd like to actually go over to Sylvie, and yes, I mean it's tourism, of course, wine tourism. There has been not very much tourism at all this year. So my next question could be more projected really to the future, from say moving from the tourism, wine tourism in the city to the countryside. Sylvie, how important is urban, I call it urban wine tourism, such as the Cité du Vin or the World of Wine museums, in successfully actually attracting people to visit wineries and vineyards and cellars? I know this past year may not be an example, but it may be an example. I don't know. Can you give me an idea on that?
Yes, hello everybody. Well, I think it's very important. It's been a tremendous change in wine tourism in Bordeaux since we've opened the Cité du Vin in 2016. Actually, for different reasons. The first reason is that before that, people would know about some wines and would decide to go and visit some of the wineries they knew before. I mean, they knew the name of. And they would probably not really get to other regions. Bordeaux is a very big wine region, and each part of it has its own personality and its own interest and a lot to offer. But they would go to one place and would not really go, they would go through Bordeaux, not really stop in Bordeaux. And Bordeaux is a fabulous city. I mean, it's an 18th century city. and there's a lot to see and to enjoy besides the wine. And now there's wine in the city, and that's very important. So on the one hand, now it creates a sort of network around the area. You have one principal experience, which is La Cité du Vin within the city. And then within the Cité du Vin, you have a tourist office that takes people out to the different regions. And when people organize that trip to Bordeaux, they usually now start with La Cité du Vin, start with Bordeaux, or finish with La Cité du Vin or with Bordeaux as a conclusion and as an explanation of a lot of what they saw in the vineyards. It puts them in a broader landscape, if you want. Because in the Cité du Vin, we talk not only about Bordeaux wines, but about the culture of all the wines in the universe. As you said, Michel, with 20 different modules and 20 different themes, cultural themes. And so it can be either a start or the end and the conclusion. But at the same time, it developed the city tourism. We have a number of hotels and beautiful hotels that opened, a number of restaurants. I think Bordeaux is the city in France which has the biggest number of restaurants per inhabitant. It really improved. It was a real dynamic that was created. And of course, the vineyards got the results of all this, because then many more people came to Bordeaux. And then, of course, they went to visit the different vineyards. Now we are in a second phase, which is first, our institution started what they call Les Routes du Vin, which is Bordeaux wine trip online, that people can travel through online before they start their trip in order to organize their trip, or they can go to agencies like ours, which is Bordeaux Saveur, but many others. And they then see the region as a whole. And so they like to go to Bordeaux. It used to be a very short trip. Now it's a bigger, longer trip. Like people go to Bordeaux and then they go to the different wine parts. Now we have another phase, which is we are interested in trying to get other experiences within the vineyards. At the moment, we're working on an experience in Sauternes, for Sauternes, which is in the southern part of Bordeaux. And I know there's a very big project also starting in Libourne, which is on the right bank near Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. And there will be others. You know, well, Adrian said it. It's not, wine tourism is not only a hotel and a restaurant. I mean, it's what the experience is. And whenever, if you have different experiences, then your trip will be longer and you'll be more interested and you spend more time, definitely. And more interest, of course.
Yes. Can you tell us about maybe some of these, new interests that, what kind of interest can we offer tourists in the vineyards other than just going to visit them? What is being?
It can be very different. You have to have imagination. I mean, a lot of properties have different experiences. It can be either tasting experiences that you can have within the property with different sort of wines, different varietals, different food and wine experiences. A lot of people have made around the world. I mean, the first ones to do that were in Napa, and they did it incredibly well. And of course, a lot of people did it after them in the different countries, and we were probably one of the last to do that. But now it has developed very quickly, probably also with the help of the project of La Cité du Vin when it came to life, because then it gave energy to a lot of wine growers to develop these experiences. So either by doing experiences in wine tasting, but also what people want more and more in visiting vineyards themselves, walking in the vines, understanding what the grapes are going through, how you make wine throughout the year. Because it also goes with the idea, especially now with the COVID, we realize that people want that experience more and more. Be outside, understand nature, and just go back to authenticity. And the more you explain, the more you have this experience, especially with the growers, then the more the people are happy and want to discover more and more. It's very important. Another thing is for the different experiences that that will be the global ones, if you want, for Sauternes, for example, you have to find something original. You have to find an idea, which is a little bit different. It's going to be very different from La Cité du Vin, but it will be very special on Sauternes wines, explaining botrytis and how the wines, how we make great Sauternes and so on and so forth. And then again, from this place, there's going to be a link with the different properties that accept to receive visitors.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you, Sylvie, a minute. Talking about the things that one can offer tourists. I mean, in this time of pandemic, we've all, learned to use different apps on the computer, different platforms and everything. And there've been also, online tastings and things like that. Do you think that, looking into the future, do you think these new techniques and technologies are going to develop more? Do you think they're going to, bring more interest into wine tourism? How do you see that?
Yes, I think they're useful, but I think, they're developing at the moment a lot because we have no other way of expressing and no other way to get contact with the wine consumers and the wine lovers. So I think that after this period, there might still be some, because people want to learn more and more. And this is a way to learn without being traveling, but they will also travel more because they want the real experience. Again, they want to touch, they want to see nature, to understand nature. And there's no better way than going to the vineyards.
No, I totally agree. Adrian, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I think I agree with what Sylvie's saying there. I think the key points that are coming out there is content, and the content is properly differentiated. But also, for example, I was 2.5 weeks ago, I was in Stellenbosch, just as they had banned the ability to serve alcohol with a meal or anywhere in South Africa, and yet I was in the middle of the Stellenbosch, so it was kind of interesting to see, what do you suddenly do? Well, fun enough, there are people who are offering opportunity to do things with chocolate or glass blowing. There was somebody there with alpaca farm who you could go and see the animals and engage with nature. There were nature walks focused around organic food production and the ability to taste, people producing lavender oils and various other aromatics, which were another part of the experience. So I think one has to think, very broadly in terms of the totality of the content. I think the other point that you're making, which is, reaching people via new channels of communication, is what most wine companies are doing for the necessity of actually marketing their brands. And that doesn't necessarily automatically connect to tourism. But I think that when you stimulate an interest with the level of consumers about your brand and your company, or indeed your region, and that stimulates people to come to visit, it's that final piece of the jigsaw with wine tourism where you can bring somebody into your winery or region or whatever, which allows you to actually connect with them at a completely different level. And that's what we're trying, I think, to do with wine tourism as an experiential process, is to get into people's souls. It goes to that idea of the Chinese proverb of, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And I think most of us who are in wine tourism are thinking about that longer term client loyalty, that ability to have that engagement with the customer. It's not about just the immediate cellar-door sale. It's how do we create these ambassadors who love our region, who go back and share that love with their friends and continue to cascade that message out, be it through their social media, family, or whatever other medium they use. And I think that's probably the raison d'etre for why we're in the tourism business in the first place.
Yes, I definitely tend to agree with you there. I think it's a very good way of branding and creating customer loyalty. And I think, as you just said now, you know, creating ambassadors for different regions it's extremely important, and I can see it happening, or you know, even here in Italy where I'm based, it's an absolute, you know, important part of wine tourism. But I'm going to go on to something different now. I'm going to go on to the issue of sustainability. And Sylvie, if I can ask you, people, of course, are more and more conscious about sustainability. And how can we adapt to being more sustainable with regard to wine tourism?
I think it's very important to, first of all, adapt in the speech. You know, when people go and visit wineries, they want to hear about how the winemaker is really concerned with sustainability, what he works, what he does for that, and so on. So each winery today has really this objective, this goal to have this in their speech. And the other thing is in the means of traveling, you have to adapt. For example, if you rent cars, they have to be electric. If you rent, you have to have many more bikes in the vineyards, because there's nothing more lovely than visiting a vineyard on a bicycle. And more people ask for that. And usually if you go to a small village that has one spot for cycling, on the first day of the week, all the bikes are gone. So we need many more bikes. Another thing is, we're thinking in Bordeaux about getting boats, you know, the big boats that would be more electric, I mean, sustainable. So these are different examples, but the idea is that when people go to one region, because they have their own experience of sustainability, their own what they do personally, they want to hear about what other people are doing, and we have to tell them that.
Yeah, no, I see definitely your point, but there's another issue which you know, one asks oneself, how can one balance the global issues of carbon emissions and the economics, balance the economics, you know, of wine tourism with travel. Adrian, do you have any thoughts on, you know, how we can balance these? And then Sylvia, I'll ask you as well. Is there a possible way of balancing all this?
Well, I mean, I think balancing is a very difficult issue, and it's clearly that we've seen with when the first lockdowns happened, that the change around the world in terms of whether it be cleaner air over the Taj Mahal or in Los Angeles, the ability to see down the coast, or indeed the clear waters that we saw in Venice, it all showed to us the human impact of travel. Having said that, you know, travel and tourism is one of the most efficient ways to transfer wealth from the richer part of the world to the poorer part of the world. Again, you know, I just said I was in South Africa. I mean, now given that South Africa is at the end of the continent, the only way to get there principally is through air travel. And in a country like that, you know, in certain parts, they're looking at 70% unemployment because tourism has disappeared. So I think it's very difficult to isolate it purely in the discussion about carbon. I think there's a separate point here, and that is that the wine industry in general plays a hugely important role in sustainability and carbon capture. After all, we take carbon from the air through our plants, and we produce, you know, a way whether we mulch those leaves or whatever we happen to do, we're actually bringing carbon back and sequestering carbon back into the ground. And indeed, there's a lot of work happening around the world in capturing the carbon off fermentation. So I think, you know, we have to get this balance between the two sides of it. Where I think it's important for individual wineries that may be, you know, tuned into this conference is this point about consistency. You know, if you're going to accept you're going to have tourists come to, and you to see you, and you want to have that, and that's a good thing to do. Nonetheless, when they arrive with you, you need to be showing that you are, looking after these issues, whether it be in the vineyard, whether it be in saving water, whether it be in your chemical applications, or any other aspect that has an impact on the local environment. And it's that consistency of message that I think the guests want to feel when they come to the source of the wine. And I think it's when you get a discord between those two, you probably have problems. When you get that properly aligned, I think you can end up doing wine tourism exceptionally well. But I do think we have to accept that people are going to continue to travel and continue to travel more, because the world is so extraordinary. There are so many people to meet, so many cultures and experiences to have, that people want to do that, and that will continue.
Yes, I'm sure it will. I just wonder how, if there are going to be all these low budget flights available, or if travel is going to be more expensive, there'll be a tax on travel. Sylvie, what do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think people are ready to accept a tax on traveling as long as they can travel. Nothing is worse than, you can hear what you hear around you today is people so frustrated not being able to go somewhere. And I think that people will definitely go on traveling, as you said, Adrian, and they're ready to pay a bit more, but they will definitely want to be free to go to the different places. But of course, we realize that at least for the next few months, of course, people will travel on shorter distances because they don't know what's going on really in the far end. But I'm confident that as soon as the vaccine will be taken by enough people, then people will really start exactly as they used to before, and even more probably, because they've been frustrated.
Yeah, if I could just jump in there, I think the key point is not to feel guilty about air travel or something like that. In fact, we often people talk about low-cost airlines as though they're terribly bad. Often they've got the newest fleets with the lightest aircraft and the most efficiency. So I think we need to go a little bit away from our sort of assumptions and accept that people will travel, and don't make them feel guilty for doing that. But perhaps whether it's a tax, whether it's a carbon offset, whether it's something else that we can do, that we can encourage people, then that's great. And after all, if people go on holiday only several times a year, they don't want to be made feel guilty for the few moments that they have leisure time. And it's perhaps that they then save the carbon at other times of the year in their day-to-day lives to allow them to perhaps spend their carbon, as it were, on a trip to the Napa Valley or to Italy or down to Chile, or wherever it happens to be that they want to go for their holidays and their experiences.
May I add to that, please, that I do believe there's a greater consumer awareness and appreciation for the impact that travel may have upon the environment. And there's a willingness to assume an added cost, as long as it's reasonable addition, and there is a good consequence of their added cost.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so which countries do you think will adapt best or become sort of more sustainable in their wine tourism? Do you think it's going to be countries like the old Europe, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, or do you think it could be the new world countries? Any of you, Sylvia or Adrian, do you have any sort of ideas on what is happening in terms of sustainability programs that are going towards sustainability for wine tourism?
I don't think you have to say there'll be more sustainable tourism. Okay. Each region is going to face this problem of sustainability in a different way. Some people will react by having special tours that will be more sustainable. Some people will be explaining more things in their vineyards. I think everybody is going to look at it in a different way, and that is what is so important. I don't think there's one country more than another. I don't see France, Europe is globally very, very concerned with sustainability. But I suppose, in other parts of the world, I don't know about South Africa, for example, might be as well.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Adrian.
Yeah, I would say that we need to separate a few things that we're talking about here, because I think in terms of wine tourism, I think what's happening is there's an appreciation around the world that experience is had in wine regions, and the benefits of wine tourism as a way to discover culture and history and traditions is hugely important. Obviously, there's a very rich vein of that across Europe, and of course, there's a lot of wealthy wine consumers who are living in Europe and often are able to travel shorter distances to go to visit it. I suspect that as we move into this post-COVID environment, it's going to take a while for people to feel more comfortable about getting into an aeroplane, or indeed the regulations may make it tougher to get into an aeroplane. So therefore, quite logically, if road transport and hotels and restaurants open up, is it more probable that someone will drive from Austria into northern Italy, or come from Galicia into Porto, than to get on a plane from New York in order to fly across to the Portuguese vineyards? I suspect it is in the first instance, because the people who are going to start traveling again are probably of a more pioneering spirit. They're people who are prepared to go and if they're going to get on a plane, they're going to take something that they may be considered a risk, and they may be, for example, prefer to do that on a short haul basis rather than a long haul, simply because of the psychological impact of being in a closed environment like an aeroplane for 2 hours versus 10 hours or 12 hours. So I suspect some of the shorter distances closer to greater populations are probably going to be able to recover faster. It seems logical to me. But I don't think that we're probably talking about a great deal of time. We're probably talking about recovery in 2021, continuing to be more on a local level, and into 2022, when people get back into the rhythms of, and we've got more experience of vaccinations and all sorts of other new regulations and approaches, that the greater international travel will have to wait till 2022, maybe into 2023. And I think that when we look back at this in a decade's time, we'll see this as a blip. We'll see it as a moment when we probably paused and reconsidered our businesses. And I hope it's probably when we look back and say we took the advantage of that pause to make the adjustments, to do the investments that made sure we had world-class, differentiated tourism product to be able to offer to the to new visitors, new and old visitors.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask one last question, then I'm going to go on to the questions from the chat. And last question is, Sylvie, how should we make all cultures welcome to travel and enjoy wine tourism as we open up to the world to come and visit us, or come and visit the wine lands again?
I think we have to adapt to the different publics that we have. Nowadays, people travel from, before COVID, used to travel from everywhere in the world. You have to have an adaptation with people who speak the language, their native language. And it's very important that within an area, you have people who can speak Chinese, Korean, maybe not Afrikaners, but at least, every language which we are not used to. Another thing is adapt to their way of traveling. The Chinese people, for example, when they travel, very often they like to be able to have Chinese food, and they're interested in the way the wines go with their own food. It will be the same with all the different kind of foods in the world. So you have to have all these different experiences that you have to adapt. And then you have to adapt also to their way of looking at things. I think what is funny is that today you have a sort of dichotomy. You have people want more and more interactive, fun, computer activities and experiences, and they want it more and more modern, and at the same time they want the most authentic, simple person-to-person experience. So, and you have to give them both. You should not give them too much of the modern thing, of the technical thing, and not too much of the simple, but give them both and they're happy.
Great. Well, I think that's a good way to end. Give them both and give them happy. And David, I can't see if there are any questions in the chat. You got your silence, David. Can you?
I understand. I'm checking the chat now. I'm looking for any questions to be had.
I can't see any.
Whilst you're looking at it, I'll just jump in just if I may, yeah, on a quick point that came across there from the end of what Sylvie was saying. I think that obviously great cultural awareness is important. I think that's what Sylvie was saying there. And certainly we had an experience in the first quarter of 2020 when the pandemic had already started in Asia. Many of our staff were concerned when they were engaged with Asian guests that they might be taking a greater health risk. And so that talks to cultural awareness, it talks to training, it talks to all of those issues. I think the other point, of course, is with wine tourism, and Sylvia was explaining very well there, between this need for authenticity, the opportunity to use technology and so on and so forth. I think one of the beauties of wine tourism is our capacity to engage all of the senses, whether we're showing people something, whether we're in fact giving them opportunity to taste a wine, to smell a wine, to use the aromas, to use the taste. This often in museum and experiences, in other opportunities people have, they don't get the opportunity to engage all of the senses. And I think that's something that when we do that and do that properly, it makes a very enriching and surrounding experience for guests. But as Sylvia says, we also have to make sure that we do that with cultural sensitivity and awareness. And I think that's going to become more acute post-COVID immediately, simply because people have had very different experiences of lockdown.
Let me bring in a few points, something that Adrian touched upon and something that's been on my mind as well. One of our attendees has brought to the fore here is that, and that is music. And I know that Adrian is looking towards stimulating all the senses in terms of helping to promote wine. And Sylvie, being Bordelaise and with Bordeaux's history of music, as being part of its culture and spreading that out into France historically in a contemporary sense. One of our attendees is wanting to know what's happening on the North American scene. I know that California has long had, as part of what it does to promote its wines, individual winery concerts, going way back to the Mondavi days and the early family days, to this now that there is a full-on festival focusing on wine with some big name musical acts. Happens typically on an annual basis. But in terms of looking at what's happening in North American wine tourism, using that as an example that possibly Europe has learned from and or possibly added to, and music. How does this fit in with our experiences of wine tourism?
There's more and more music festivals in the different wine regions. I mean, when people come and visit wineries, they want to visit different wineries, as we said, technical and also authentic, but also they want to have fun in different objects. For example, you can have a festival, a music festival, a classic music festival, but it can be an opera music festival, or it can be just a concert. A lot of private wineries just organize concerts. First of all, it gives the artists a way to express in a different location than they usually do, than in a theater. And also, I mean, usually the people who love wine are usually people who love culture in general. So they like to hear any kind of music. It can be jazz festival. There was one in Saint-Emilion for years. It can be all types of music, but it can not only be music, it can be all kinds of events. They love mixing wine knowledge with other events. I was just talking with somebody from the Bordeaux football team, and we are thinking of having, after COVID, of course, but events that could link football lovers, soccer lovers with wine lovers, because a lot of them are both. And so, you know, you can always invent new things as long as you mix the different types of culture.
Something that Porto and Bordeaux have in common is a river between them. And these days where people are inhibited from social gathering for good reason, perhaps there's an opportunity to have music on boats or people on boats in the river as music is being played to keep them disparate yet drinking wine in a relatively safe environment. Remember, they're not driving vehicles, they're gathered in groups on boats, but in open air situations, not congregated so intensely together. And one of our panelists wanted me to, one of our attendees wanted me to mention that India has an ongoing festival as well that I was aware of. I'm sorry not to have mentioned it sooner, where wine and food is a regular occurrence and thousands of people attend annually for this. So this is not only in this part of the world, but also in India, this is a verifiable success.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I think the point you're raising, David, which I think is a very good one, and you've seen people like Mission Hill who ran a festival up in the Okanagan Valley up in Canada, not an area that was necessarily easy to get to, but became known for that. That brought people to the area. That's obviously benefited not only their winery, but a number of other wineries, restaurants and hotels in that area. So I think the point is that you know, there's an important vehicle that we can use here for the promotion of a region, and that's why I think that having this integration of wine into a general tourism program of an area is very important. I would encourage, you know, people who are watching, you know, one of the things that one probably has learned through this COVID and this lockdown is the importance of actually talking to people in your local community. The success of engaging locally probably will have a long-term capacity to amplify the message that you're putting forward. Creating content that engages the local community probably means you're creating content that will engage people internationally, and particularly the local communities involved. It will seem more authentic. And I think many, many people have done that. And I'm also quite interested, rather than just simply in the concept of talking about concerts. You've seen work done at Oxford University in the use of music to help people taste wine, whether you know, greater amount of violin music, for example, accentuates the acids in wine. So there's lots of different things out there. I think the key point in any region is people shouldn't try to all do the same thing. Let's all create slightly different content, because all of that creates a much richer destination, and with that richer destination, everybody wins. And that's why I think the early comments that Sylvie was saying about the huge success of the Cité du Vin, which has attracted people to the city, have created an experience, and then obviously been able to get out to the villages and engage with the wineries. A huge example of successful wine tourism.
Thank you both very much, and thank you, David, very much. I would just like to say that in our next more in-depth session on the 25th of February, my guests will be Adrian Bridge and Sylvie Cars, and with the addition of Gonzalo Merino, who's a wine tourism coordinator for Bodegas Argentinas. And of course, we'll be looking in depth at the future and the meaning of wine tourism, and how do we define it still, and how should we look to the future and its development. But in particular with Gonzalo, we'll be looking at a specific project which is born out of wine tourism, and it's connected to boost a zero waste concept in the region, looking at how to recycle wastage from this industry and projecting a more sustainable industry while creating jobs for local inhabitants out of this process of recycling, which I think is sort of what we were talking about before as well. And also, you know, I know that Gonzalo organizes different festivals, film festivals, food festivals. So we can go further into all of this. And we'll also be looking at in more detail at the findings of this very recent international survey report, which Adrian also mentioned, on wine tourism, which was carried out by the Swedish company winetourism.com. which gives a very good helicopter perspective on wine tourism during 2020 and of its future prospects in the coming years. There'll be a few slides on this. So, please do come and join us in February. I just wanted to maybe put on the first slide, but I don't know how much time we have on this right now. No, I got a sort of a no from David there. But yes, so you'll just have to come on and see the whole projection of the survey, which I think is extremely interesting, and join us on the 25th of February for our next session with Gonzalo Merino and all of you. And thank you again. Thank you, Sylvie. Thank you, Adrian, for the time and your comments, which I think have been very interesting to this session on wine.
Well, again, sorry to cut you all short. Clearly, yep. You have shared a lot. And I know that I want to thank not only the speakers here today, but also our attendees, a few of whom you'll be seeing in the conference next month. Thank you, fellow moderators and panelists, for dropping in, and from those of you all around the world. A little bit of housekeeping here, please. Our early bird ticket offer is still available. I highly encourage you to check it out. And I want to again thank all of you in attendance in all forms for helping us to promote the future of wine through these events that we're staging. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time at our next webinar. Good day, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the attendees as well. It was great to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
The world's wine professionals gather February 23rd through 26th for Wine Future 2021, the first fully virtual international wine business conference. Join over 50 speakers, including Francis Ford Coppola, UNESCO's Irina Bokova, and the OIV's Pau Roca, as they share solutions to the challenges of the pandemic, economic recession, climate crisis, and systemic inequities facing the world today. Register now at www.winefuture2021.com to be part of the future of wine, presented by Wines of Portugal.